Chapter 1: City of Glass and Smoke.
Los Angeles pulsed beneath a velvet night sky, the city lights flickering like the heartbeat of something alive, restless and ancient. Neon signs bled color onto the rain-slicked sidewalks. Laughter and the low hum of distant music spilled from hidden doorways and rooftop bars. To Ezekiel, LA was a labyrinth of dreams half forgotten and promises half fulfilled, and he loved it with a kind of reckless devotion. He had met Juliet in the midst of it all, a chance encounter at a smoky lounge off Sunset Boulevard, where the drinks were overpriced and the air was thick with something unspoken. She wore a crimson slip dress and a sly smile that seemed to know too much. From the moment their eyes met, Ezekiel felt something shift inside him, as if a door he hadn't known existed had quietly opened. They became inseparable after that night. They chased the city together, after-hours clubs with blacked-out windows, underground parties in crumbling mansions, pop-up raves where the walls themselves seemed to breathe. There was a thrill in losing themselves in the noise, in the blurred hours between midnight and dawn, when the world seemed pliable and unreal. It was easy to forget everything else, with a drink in one hand and Juliet's fingers laced through his. Juliet was a mystery he couldn't solve. Some nights, she was vibrant and wild, leading him through the dark like a flickering flame. Other nights, she was distant, her eyes reflecting something hollow he didn't dare question. She told him little about herself, where she came from, who she truly was. But in the thick, narcotic haze of their nights together, Ezekiel didn't care. All that mattered was now. The drugs blurred the edges of reality, little pills that melted away the sharpness of fear, powder that made the city lights drip like wet paint across the night sky. Sometimes, Ezekiel thought he saw shadows moving where there was no one. Sometimes, he thought he heard laughter, low and bitter, following him through the alleys. But he chalked it up to the substances, to exhaustion, to his own overactive imagination. And always, there was Juliet, smiling, touching his face, whispering in his ear things he could never fully remember in the morning. She was the constant, the anchor he clung to as the city spun around them in electric delirium. He didn't know it yet, but Juliet was leading him somewhere he could never return from. Somewhere a man in a black hat was already waiting. The lounge was buried 3 stories underground, tucked between an abandoned art gallery and a pawn shop with flickering lights. A blood-red sign above the rusted door simply read, "Eternity." Inside, the air was thick with incense and cigarette smoke. A jazz band played something broken and slow, the singer's voice lilting like a prayer for lost souls. Ezekiel nursed a drink at the bar, half listening, half dreaming, when she appeared. Juliet slid onto the stool beside him, like she belonged there, like she belonged everywhere. Her hair was dark as spilled ink, her skin warm under the pulsing amber lights. She smelled faintly of sandalwood and something sharper, something he couldn't name. "You look like you're waiting for something," she said, her voice smooth and careless. Ezekiel blinked at her, caught off guard. "Maybe I am. Maybe I just don't know what it is yet." She smiled, a lazy, knowing smile, and raised her glass in a mock toast. "To the lost," she said. They drank, and just like that, the night cracked open. They talked about nothing and everything, music, art, the strange sadness of the city. She asked him if he believed in fate. He said no, not really. She laughed, a low, musical sound, and told him that fate believed in him. Later, They danced under dim lights, her body pressed against his, moving slow, hypnotic. Time lost meaning. The world fell away, and there was only Juliet's breath on his neck, her hands tracing constellations against his skin. Somewhere between the third drink and the seventh, Ezekiel thought he saw something strange. Out of the corner of his eye, near the entrance, a tall figure, too tall, stood completely still, wearing a wide-brimmed black hat that hid his face. The crowd shifted around him without noticing. When Ezekiel looked again, the man was gone. He shook it off. The night was heavy with illusions. That's what this city was. Illusion on top of illusion. Juliet pulled him closer, her eyes glittering like dark jewels. "Stay with me," she whispered. He did.
Chapter 2. All the Beautiful Sins.
For a while, it was perfect. Days bled into nights without meaning. Ezekiel and Juliet carved their own world from the city's chaos. A private kingdom of neon-lit diners, graffiti-splattered rooftops, back-alley clubs, and motel balconies overlooking dying highways. They drank cheap wine at midnight on Venice Beach, the ocean black and endless before them. Juliet laughed as she danced barefoot in the sand, the hem of her dress whipping around her legs like a ghost. Ezekiel couldn't remember the last time he had felt so alive, so completely seen. He didn't notice how the moonlight sometimes seemed too bright, or how shadows clung to Juliet just a little longer than they should have. One night, they broke into an abandoned movie theater downtown. The screen was torn, the seats ripped apart, the whole place a crumbling shrine to forgotten dreams. Juliet found the old projector and somehow coaxed it to life. The flickering reel played a warped cartoon, laughing faces melting into screams, bright colors bleeding into black. They lay together across the ruined seats, watching the images dance across the cracked ceiling. "I used to come here," she said, tracing invisible shapes across his chest. "With your family?" he asked sleepily. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not exactly. Before he could ask more, she kissed him, deep and hungry, and the question dissolved between their lips. Other nights blurred into each other like a dream. A party in a crumbling mansion where the walls seemed to breathe with every bass drop, and Ezekiel could have sworn he saw something, crawling just out of sight. A stolen motorcycle ride through the empty LA River at 3 a.m., Juliet whooping like a mad thing behind him. A secret club in Koreatown where the air itself seemed too thick to breathe, and the mirrors in the bathrooms showed reflections that didn't quite match reality. And always Juliet, pulling him closer, whispering promises he could barely remember when the sun rose. There were moments, brief, shivering moments, when Ezekiel caught her staring at him with an intensity that almost frightened him, like she was studying him, measuring him. But then she would smile, touch his face, and the fear would vanish like smoke. He told himself it was the drugs, the adrenaline, the rush of falling in love too fast. He told himself whatever he needed to believe, because loving Juliet felt like free fall, and he didn't want a parachute.
Chapter 3. Things you pretend not to see.
It started with little things. A door he swore he had closed would be standing open when he returned. His phone would buzz with calls from unknown numbers, just static on the other end. Streetlights would flicker when he walked underneath them, stuttering in a rhythm that almost sounded like a heartbeat. The first time he noticed it for real, was during a party at a dive bar in East Hollywood. Juliet had disappeared into the crowd, and Ezekiel wandered out to the alley for air. The night was cold and brittle. Trash skittered across the cracked pavement. In the distance, a dog barked, then another, and then the sound seemed to warp, to stretch, as if the whole city were exhaling. And there, at the end of the alley, stood the figure. The same too-tall man with the black hat. This time, Ezekiel saw the glint of a silver chain hanging from his neck and something that might have been a smile, too wide, too thin, curling beneath the brim of the hat. He blinked, and the alley was empty. Inside, he found Juliet waiting for him at the bar, a cigarette dangling from her fingers. She smiled when she saw him, but there was a shadow in her eyes, something tight and knowing. "You okay?" she asked lightly. "Yeah," he lied, swallowing the lump in his throat. Juliet leaned in and kissed his temple, murmuring, "Stay close to me tonight." Her touch was electric, grounding, and yet Ezekiel couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, somehow, a wire had been cut. Other nights brought other omens. He dreamed of the ocean swallowing the city, Juliet standing waist-deep in black water, calling to him. His reflection in the mirror would lag just a second too slow, blinking after he did. Songs on the radio would warp into languages he didn't recognize. One morning, he woke to find a handprint smeared in ash across the inside of his apartment window. From the inside, Juliet was already gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of sandalwood. He told himself it was exhaustion, stress, bad trips, but deep down, a primitive part of him, the part that still believed in monsters, stirred and whispered. She brought this with her. Still, he couldn't walk away. He was already too far gone. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of reason, the man with the black hat was waiting, watching, smiling.
Chapter 4: Nightshade and Neon.
The nights got heavier. Clubs blurred into each other, faceless bodies, bass so deep it rattled Ezekiel's teeth, smoke so thick it carved shapes out of the air. Juliet was always there, leading him deeper into the heart of it. Darker clubs, darker crowds, darker highs. The drugs changed too. What they took now wasn't just for fun. It felt ancient, almost ceremonial. Black capsules pressed into his palm by strangers with empty eyes. Silver powder that left metallic burns along the edges of his nostrils. Things that didn't have names. Reality began to slip sideways. Sometimes he heard whispers in the music. Not lyrics, but voices, calling him by name. Sometimes he saw the walls breathing, the ceiling melting into an endless, starless sky. He stopped trying to tell himself it wasn't real. One night, after a particularly brutal trip, Ezekiel woke in Juliet's bed, drenched in sweat. She sat beside him, smoking a cigarette, watching him with unreadable eyes. "You ever wonder why you're different?" she asked softly. Ezekiel blinked, struggling to sit up. "What are you talking about?" She exhaled smoke in a long, slow ribbon. "Your family, your blood. You think you're just some nobody living in LA? Some random kid?" A cold weight settled in his gut. "My parents," he started, but the memories were fragmented, blurry around the edges. His mother's haunted eyes, his father's strange, frantic prayers late at night when he thought Ezekiel was asleep. Juliet flicked ash into a crystal dish. "They weren't afraid for you, Ezekiel. They were afraid of you." The room seemed to tilt. Shadows crawled across the floor. "I don't understand," he said, throat dry. "You will," Juliet murmured, almost tenderly. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, her lips burning cold. "Your blood is old, older than this city, older than anything you've been allowed to remember." Later, Ezekiel sat alone on Juliet's balcony, staring out over the city's endless lights. The man with the black hat stood on a rooftop across the street, motionless, a silent sentinel. He raised his hand, not in threat, but almost in greeting. And for the first time, Ezekiel realized he wasn't just being haunted, he was being claimed.
Chapter 5. Ghosts in the Walls.
Ezekiel didn't sleep much anymore. When he did, he dreamed of endless hallways, doors without handles, voices whispering just beyond the walls. Sometimes he dreamed of Juliet, standing in a white room full of broken clocks, her mouth moving in silent prayers. Other times, he dreamed of the man with the black hat, always at a distance, always watching, not chasing him, not threatening, just waiting, patient, knowing. Deep down, Ezekiel sensed it. The man wasn't his enemy, not yet, maybe not ever. There was a strange kind of mercy in the way the figure stood apart from the madness engulfing him, as if he understood something Ezekiel didn't, something he would understand when the time came. Meanwhile, the curse was tightening its grip. He started hearing things that couldn't be real. Children's laughter at 4 a.m., echoing from empty streets. A woman's voice calling his name from inside locked bathrooms, a scratching noise at the base of his skull, whenever he tried to think too hard about his past. Objects moved when he wasn't looking. Mirrors showed glimpses of other places, a desert beneath a dead sun, a house swallowed in flame. Sometimes he caught flashes of strange symbols, scorched into walls or carved into sidewalks. Symbols that made his blood buzz painfully in his veins. They felt familiar, ancient. Mine, some deep, bone-deep instinct whispered, "This is mine." Juliet noticed the change in him. She became softer, more possessive, her hands always lingering too long on his wrists, his throat, his chest. "You're waking up," she whispered to him one night, curled against his side. "It's beautiful. Terrible, but beautiful." Ezekiel wanted to ask what she meant. He wanted to ask 1,000 things, but every time the questions rose to his lips, a wave of exhaustion crushed him, a heavy, deliberate fog. Some part of him didn't want to know, not yet. Out on the streets, the man with the black hat kept vigil. Not a friend, not a foe, an observer. An insurance policy for a future Ezekiel couldn't imagine yet. A future soaked in blood and fire and vengeance.
Chapter 6. All the things we pretend are forever.
There were moments when it almost felt real, when the world outside stopped spinning, and it was just Ezekiel and Juliet. A heartbeat, a breath, a flicker of something achingly normal. They made a home out of the ruins around them. Cheap motel rooms, abandoned lofts, half-finished high-rises overlooking the broken city. He memorized her in pieces, the little scar above her eyebrow, the way her voice dropped to a whisper when she said his name, the smell of her hair after it rained, the cold press of her silver rings against his skin. Some nights, they talked for hours about nothing, lying tangled together on threadbare couches, drunk on stolen wine and the soft hum of dying neon outside the windows. Juliet would trace the veins in his arms with her fingertips, murmuring old songs Ezekiel didn't recognize. Songs that made his heart hurt, even though he didn't understand the words. One night, they drove up into the hills, past Mulholland, past everything, and found an abandoned mansion eaten by vines and rot. Juliet led him inside with a flashlight and a bottle of whiskey, her laughter echoing off marble floors and broken chandeliers. They danced barefoot in the ruined ballroom, the beams of the flashlight spinning dizzy patterns across the walls. "You and me," Juliet whispered, pulling him closer, against everything. Ezekiel believed her. He wanted to believe her so badly it ached. They made love on a dusty velvet chaise. The city sprawled like a dying god far below them. Outside, a storm rolled over the hills, all black clouds and white lightning, but inside, it was just them. Just their bodies, their promises, their lies. Afterward, lying beside her in the half-light, Ezekiel traced the faded tattoo along her spine, a crowned serpent swallowing its own tail. He wanted to ask what it meant. He didn't. Some things were better left untouched. The deeper he fell into Juliet, the further he drifted from everything else. His friends, his job, his old life, his own reflection. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered but her. Her kiss was a brand, her touch a leash, her love a noose he wore willingly. Outside, in the city's broken heart, the man with the black hat watched, still silent, still patient, still waiting. The storm rolled on outside, a low, endless growl across the hills. But the world inside the broken mansion had shrunk to the small space between Ezekiel and Juliet. They lay tangled together on the velvet chaise, a threadbare blanket pulled around their bodies. The air smelled of dust and rain and skin. Juliet traced lazy patterns along his chest, her head resting just beneath his collarbone, listening to the steady thump of his heart. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, Ezekiel broke the silence. "When I was 8, he said, voice rough, "I was in a car accident with my mom." Juliet shifted slightly, lifting her head just enough to meet his eyes. No pressure, just waiting, listening. "We were coming back from my cousin's birthday party," he continued, staring up at the cracked ceiling. "It was late, it was raining. I remember the wipers barely worked, and she kept singing along to the radio, laughing like nothing could touch us." He paused, swallowing hard. "Some drunk asshole ran a red light and hit us, driver's side. I don't remember the impact. I don't remember the hospital. Just ... He closed his eyes. Her perfume. It was the last thing. It was everywhere. Juliet's hand moved up, cupping the side of his face gently, grounding him. Ezekiel opened his eyes again, blinking against the sting. "I woke up a week later. Broken ribs, concussion, all that shit. My dad wouldn't even look at me for the first few days. He just sat in the corner, staring at nothing." He let out a shaky breath. "It wasn't just the accident that broke him. It was the idea that I lived, and she didn't. Like somehow it should have been the other way." Juliet brushed her thumb across his cheekbone, not saying anything, just letting him talk. Ezekiel turned his head slightly, burying his face against her wrist. "I used to think it was my fault," he whispered, "that I cursed her, that if I hadn't begged to stay longer at the party, we wouldn't have been on that road at that time." Juliet kissed his forehead, slow and soft. "You didn't curse anyone," she murmured against his skin. "You survived. That's not a sin." He laughed, broken and small. Sometimes it feels like it is. Juliet pulled him closer, wrapping herself around him like a shield. "You're here because you were meant to be here," she said. "You're stronger than you know, Zeke." No one had called him that in years. He closed his eyes, letting the sound of her heartbeat, her breath, her warmth drown out the storm outside. For the first time in a long time, Ezekiel let the walls inside him fall, and Juliet was there to catch every broken piece. The rain softened against the broken windows, a steady whisper. Ezekiel felt lighter after speaking, raw, yes, but lighter, as if bleeding out. The memory had made room for something new. For a long time, Juliet simply held him, their bodies pressed close beneath the threadbare blanket. He thought she might fall asleep like that, safe, warm, real. But then he felt her shift slightly, resting her chin on his chest, her fingers playing absently along his ribs. "You know," she said quietly, "you're not the only one carrying ghosts." Ezekiel looked down at her, surprised by the heaviness in her voice. Juliet didn't usually talk about herself. Not like this. He said nothing, just waited, offering the same silence she had given him. She smiled faintly, a sad, brittle thing. "My family was..." She hesitated, searching for the words. "Different." He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, encouraging her. "We moved a lot," she continued. "Small towns, cities, always starting over. No one ever stayed long enough to ask why." Ezekiel caught the shadow that crossed her face, the way her body tensed slightly, even as she spoke. "There were rules," she said, voice lowering. "Stupid ones, it seemed like, when I was little. Things I wasn't allowed to do, people I wasn't allowed to talk to, places I wasn't allowed to go." She let out a hollow laugh. "Sometimes it felt like we were cursed or something." Ezekiel's heart clenched. He thought about all the nights he'd spent as a kid, feeling like the universe had marked him somehow. Like survival itself was some cruel joke. He knew that loneliness, that wrongness. He tightened his arms around her. Juliet looked up at him then, her eyes wide and wet, shimmering in the dim light. "My mom," her voice cracked, just slightly. "She wasn't like other moms. Some days, she'd just disappear, lock herself in her room for days, talking to herself, screaming at shadows." Ezekiel's breath hitched. Juliet pressed her forehead against his chest, her voice barely a whisper. "I used to think if I was just good enough, if I followed all the stupid rules, maybe she'd love me the way normal mums love their kids." She laughed again, a broken sound. "But it doesn't work like that, does it?" Ezekiel pulled her up gently, cradling her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You were just a kid," he said fiercely. "It wasn't your fault. It's never the kid's fault." Juliet's lips trembled. For a moment she looked so young, so vulnerable, that it made something fragile and desperate twist inside him. She leaned forward and kissed him, slow, deep, aching, like she was pouring every cracked, broken part of herself into him. And Ezekiel let her fill all the hollow places inside him with her pain, her promises, her lies. Later, they lay curled together in the dark, their fingers intertwined. Two broken people, stitching themselves together with whispered secrets and borrowed dreams. The storm outside finally faded, but inside them, something else was building. Something deeper, darker, and far more dangerous.
Chapter 7. Like nothing can touch us.
There was a stretch of time where the world felt like it had vanished. like the city. The noise, the weight of everything before, had melted away. For Ezekiel, there was only her, Juliet, the flame in the dark, the girl with the haunted eyes and dangerous smile. The only thing that made the chaos feel like it had meaning. They lived like fugitives from reality, stealing time, stealing pleasure, stealing each other in every space they could find. Rooftops, alleyways, neon-lit motels. Their bodies always tangled, their voices always hoarse from laughter or moaning or arguing before melting back into hunger again. Some nights, they drove until the sunrise bled across the city. Juliet behind the wheel of a borrowed Camaro. Ezekiel's hand on her thigh, her cigarette glowing like a star as they raced down the freeway with no destination. Other nights, they lay on the hood of the car in dead silence, staring up at the stars like they were ancient gods waiting to be devoured. They made plans that would never happen, talked about leaving LA, about stealing a boat, about changing their names and disappearing. It was all madness, beautiful, unsustainable madness, but they clung to it like drowning souls. One night, Ezekiel woke to an empty bed. The clock blinked 3:07 a.m. The air was too still. He rose, disoriented, and found the door slightly ajar. Outside, Juliet stood in the alley, barefoot, dressed only in his hoodie, speaking softly to someone in the shadows. The figure didn't move, just stood there, tall, angular, barely lit by the amber glow of the broken street lamp. Ezekiel blinked, and the figure was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just air. Juliet turned around, surprised, or pretending to be. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. She smiled like nothing was strange. "Couldn't sleep. Too many dreams." They didn't speak of it again. But Ezekiel couldn't forget the way her hands shook when she climbed back into bed, or how tightly she clung to him, like something was coming and only he could keep it away. The next night, she had a nightmare. Ezekiel woke to her whispering, low and terrified. "No, no, he's watching. It's not time. We broke the seal." Her voice was a thread unraveling. Ezekiel shook her gently. "Juliet, wake up. It's just a dream." Her eyes flew open. For a moment, they weren't her eyes. They were black, hollow, drenched in something ancient and wrong. Then they blinked, back to normal. She smiled, small, tired, forced. "Just a dream, baby," she whispered, curling into him. But even after her breathing slowed, Ezekiel couldn't sleep, because he'd heard the fear in her voice, felt the tremor in her skin. And when she said, "just a dream," he didn't believe her. The next few days felt like static in Ezekiel's brain, hazy, golden, charged. They drank too much, slept too little, fucked like the world was ending. Juliet laughed louder than she ever had before. She pulled him into fountains, into midnight raves, into trespassed hotel pools with champagne they couldn't afford. Every second with her felt like a dare. Every kiss, a promise with an edge. But underneath it all, Ezekiel started to feel it. Something shifting, something off. It began small. A man watching them from across a club, face half-covered, unmoving. A voicemail on Juliet's phone in a language Ezekiel didn't recognize. She deleted it immediately. A scribbled phrase on their bathroom mirror, in red lipstick, "You're not supposed to love him." Juliet laughed it off. "Drunk Juliet's dramatic," she said, brushing her teeth. But her hand trembled the entire time. One night, they lay tangled in a motel bed just outside East Hollywood. Neon flickered through the blinds. Music from the street echoed like a memory. Ezekiel had his head on her stomach, tracing slow circles on her bare skin. "Tell me something real," she whispered. He hesitated, then exhaled. "My mom died when I was 8, he said softly. Juliet stopped breathing for a moment. Car crash, no seatbelt, a storm that came out of nowhere. "My dad was never the same after," he said. "I was in the back seat. I remember glass, screaming, then nothing. When I woke up, she was already gone." Silence. Juliet pulled him closer, wrapped herself around him like a blanket of warmth and quiet understanding. "She was the only person who ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere," he added, voice cracking. "After that, it was just cold." Juliet didn't say anything. She just kissed the top of his head and held him tighter. For the first time in years, Ezekiel cried. And for the first time in her life, Juliet let herself feel the guilt. Later that night, with the room silent and soft, Juliet turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "My family was broken before I was even born," she said. Ezekiel looked at her, surprised by how raw her voice was. "My dad, he was afraid of everything. He used to say things like, 'The blood remembers, and we're being punished.' But I didn't understand. I just knew I wasn't safe. Ever. Her lips trembled. "He locked me in the basement once, for 3 days, said he was protecting me." Ezekiel moved to hold her, but she didn't let him yet. "I never knew what normal felt like," she continued. "So when I'm with you, I don't know what to do with it. With you, it feels good, and that scares the shit out of me." Ezekiel finally reached for her, cupping her face. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Juliet nodded, but behind her eyes was something ancient, something desperate. And for a brief second, Ezekiel thought he saw her reflection blink out in the window. The next morning, she was gone again. Only a note on the pillow. "Had to clear my head. Don't follow me." But he did. And what he saw would begin to unravel everything.
Chapter 8. The First Fracture.
The city had a different texture at night. Not the buzzing neon or the sticky heat of after hours, but the underlayer, the rotted roots under the glamour, the hollow echoes in forgotten alleys. It was here Ezekiel found himself, walking alone with nothing but the silence of unanswered questions. Juliet's note had been vague, soft, "Had to clear my head, don't follow me." But he did. Something had changed. A hairline crack in the mirror they'd built together, now spiderwebbing into something uglier. She was hiding something, and it wasn't just the weight of her past. It was her present, her now. He followed the trail she didn't even know she left. He knew how she moved, how she thought. He remembered a phrase she once let slip about an old warehouse near the river, where her father used to take her when she needed to scream. That's where he went. The warehouse loomed like a broken cathedral, all rusted steel and shattered windows. Inside, faint light flickered like a dying heartbeat. Ezekiel slipped through a side entrance, crouching low in the shadows. What he saw made the breath leave his lungs. Juliet was standing in the center of a circle. Hooded figures surrounded her, their faces hidden, their voices low and deliberate. Candles burned in a ring around them, casting their bodies in trembling silhouettes. "You've become attached," said one voice, male, cold, That was never part of the plan. Juliet's jaw tightened. Plans change. Not this one. Another voice, female, sharp and thick with contempt. You were supposed to break him, not fall in love. Juliet didn't flinch. He deserves better than this. You knew the terms. Blood never forgets. The debt is almost paid, but if you falter now... He doesn't know anything, Juliet cut in. I've protected him, more than I should have. That silence again, the kind that means something ancient is listening. Then end it, the cold voice said, before he learns what he is. Something primal, twisted in Ezekiel's stomach. He backed away slowly, slipping out of the warehouse unnoticed, his heart rattling in his chest. His mind spiraled. Before he learns what he is, back at the motel, he waited. Hours passed. She returned just before dawn, hair damp, eyes hollowed. She smiled, kissed him softly, climbed into bed like nothing had happened. But he couldn't sleep. He waited until her breathing slowed, then slid out from under the sheets and knelt beside her bag. Fingers trembling, he unzipped it. There, tucked beneath perfume, cigarettes, and lip gloss, was a book. Not just any book. It looked ancient, bound in something that felt like skin. No title, no author. Inside, the pages writhed with symbols, diagrams, names crossed out in blood, circles and sigils, family trees. He flipped to the back, and there it was, a name scratched in jagged black ink. Juliet. Beneath it, his name, Ezekiel. Not written like a new entry, written like it had been there, all along.